I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to talk to you guys. I don't know what proportion we have of coaches, counselors, helping professionals. I think that probably that's what a lot of y'all are. And so there are hopefully going to be helpful things for all of us as we take a look at the why beneath the what. I've been living in a life of recovery myself for close to 17 years. And one of the first things that I hear and heard about when I started my own recovery was how important sobriety is. And I think we'd all agree with that. But really, the hope that I have for this talk is that it's going to help us put sobriety in its proper perspective, not making it something that doesn't matter, not making it something that is an idol or the be all end all, but really seeing the role that it plays in an overall process of recovery. And so looking at the why beneath the what, let's take a look just at sobriety. I mean, anyone who's spent any time in recovery, whether that's your own, or if you're a sponsor, or if you're supporting recovering people in some way as a counselor, coach, or helper, we all know that sobriety is a very important part of recovery. I would say it's essential. I would say that it's indispensable. So as we take a look at its importance and try to zone in on its proper role in a process of recovery, I want us to be sure that we're starting out on the same page. And so I'm going to ask a few questions. First, what does it mean? When we say the word sobriety, what comes to mind? Because I think that semantics are important. We're going to look at that. We're going to ask, why does sobriety matter? And then why is there more to it than recover? Or why is there more to recovery than just sobriety? So first, let's go back and say, what does it mean? So this is where we're going to invite you, if you want, to put something in the chat, because I'm just really interested in what does it mean to you when you hear people talking about their sobriety? What comes to mind? I'm vamping a little bit here to give you a chance to type something in there. And I'm also going to welcome Phil and Todd if y'all have any thoughts about what comes to your mind when you hear sobriety. Anybody who wants to feed in with that, we'll just take a minute or so to see if we have any answers to that before I move on. One thing I'm becoming more comfortable with is awkward silence. If we don't get any feedback, I'll move on, but I do want to give it just a second in case we do. What does sobriety mean to you? Okay, I see a bubble popping up in the chat, so I'm trusting Todd or Phil are going to let me know if there's a comment. And I can see that Todd and Phil are muted, so just in case you're reading something to me, I can't hear it yet.
Well, we
there we go.
A glitch. We
Ah.
chat had been disabled, so
Oh,
they were
now you're enabled.
Counterfeit bubbles. Now we're enabled. Sorry about that. Put me in charge of tech, Greg. That's a big mistake.
Was there something in the chat?
I posted that sobriety is abstinence from a chemical or behavior that is maladaptive to living fully.
Yeah, I like that. That's very, very similar actually to something that I kind of put in here as a suggested working definition for our talk. So I'll do that. And again, we can always, pop in with additional comments. I'm calling it a state of being in which a person is not altered by the process or substance to which they are addicted. And so if we're defining sobriety in that range for our purposes today, we're really kind of looking at sobriety as an synonym for abstaining from acting out behavior. Now, there's a bigger discussion that we could have about sobriety when it comes to sober-mindedness, right? I mean, I know that in my 16 plus years of recovery, by God's grace, I've been sober from my acting out behavior, but there have been plenty of times that I was not sober minded because my brain was kind of drifting off into checking out or maybe even, kind of flirting with fantasy, but it didn't translate into behavior. That's a discussion for another time because we could have a great talk about sober mindedness. But for our purposes today, we're talking about sober behavior. And so, with that in mind, if sobriety is what we're after, why does it matter? What are some things, and maybe just in the interest of time, I'm going to just ask you to think about this, and then if you do want to feedback, Todd or Phil can just pipe up with some things that are coming in on the chat, but I'll keep moving. What are some things? Think about some things that you maybe have heard your friends or your clients say when they experience a lapse in sobriety, because I'm sure that if we've spent any amount of time in this space, you've probably heard some of the same things that I have. Somebody will say, hey, I slipped up, but it's not a big deal. I'm just moving on from it. Or I slipped up and I'm a piece of, what? Just really, really down on themselves. Or I slipped up, but I'm just really focusing on being kind to myself and I'm just not going to beat myself up over it. Or I slipped up. Of course I slipped up because that's who I am and I'm never going to change. Honestly, it really can go either way, can it? An unhealthy view about a lack of sobriety can contribute either to shame or to self-delusion. And really, if we're looking for recovery, neither of those things is helpful. A no big deal attitude minimizes the impact that this behavior has, destroying my life, my relationships. But the I'm the worst attitude is based in shame, this toxic experience that we have, and it distracts us from focusing on anything that's helpful. And so we want to just point out the fact that sobriety does play a critical role in the overall process of recovery. And that could be full stop. There's a period there. Sobriety plays a critical role. And also, it's not all there is to recovery. There is more to recovery than just sobriety. And so, why is there more to recovery? That's the third question. Why can't I just get sober and say, okay, I guess I'm fixed. It's been a year since I've acted out, so I'm done. Well, let me ask you again to kind of ponder and consider. Have you come across people or recovery fellowships that solely emphasize sobriety? Have you ever been a part of a meeting where the only things that's talked about is, look, it doesn't matter what's underneath it. It doesn't matter why. That's a waste of time. You just need to quit looking at porn. You need to quit cheating. You need to quit acting out. That's all. Once you can do that, you're fine. Or have you been around people that don't really emphasize sobriety enough? They very wisely say we need to get underneath it, but maybe they kind of tip the scales that way too far, and they don't emphasize that sobriety is important enough or at all. And what impact do you imagine it could have on people who are exposed to kind of either extreme way of thinking? Would be interested if anybody has experienced that and have any comments about that. So I'm going to pause for a second because I have asked a couple of questions in the last few minutes. And if anybody has given any answers that y'all would like to share with me, I'm not looking at them. So if there is anything, let me know. Otherwise, we'll keep going.
We have one, Greg, just a comment. It says, relapses make me feel numb. I feel like my feelings are not as noticeable.
Oh, wow. That's a really good thing to know. That's a really good catch because I think it does do that. When a person's in a state of relapse, there is a numbing element to it. And it makes sense because there are certain feelings that we're trying to escape, but the numbing doesn't just apply to the hard feelings. It kind of applies to all feelings. And so that's a good thing to notice.
Right on. It's very much, it's an undercurrent of much of what we call dry drunk syndrome.
Yeah, for sure. Well, here is a perspective that I hope that we can focus on over the next, 25, 30 minutes or so, however much time we have left before questions. And that is, I believe that sobriety is the key that opens the door to the deep discoveries that are waiting for us in recovery. It's the key that opens the door to the deep discoveries. And so thinking of it as a key, sobriety is something that I really need to have in place in my life if I am to move forward in recovery. I really can't go to all the places I need to go if I'm not sober, or I certainly can't fully gain the benefit of those places if I'm not sober. On the other hand, sobriety, with it being a key to unlock the door, isn't really something where I'm just supposed to sit there in my house and admire my shiny key, right? Because if all I do is think, oh, look at this great sobriety, then I'm potentially missing out on the more that there is. You know, it's really important that we recognize that Jesus didn't say, I have come that they may have sobriety. He said, I've come that they may have life. And so that's really the focal point. Sobriety is pointing to something bigger. Sobriety isn't the end, it's the means to the end. And so as we continue now, there's no doubt that there's a very important what. Sobriety is the what in our discussion today. And we don't ignore it. We can't ignore it because we recognize we can't go very far or very deep in recovery without it. We can go through the motions, we can go to meetings, we can go to counseling, we can read books, and yet still wonder, well, gosh, why do I not feel like this is clicking? If I've never established or pursued sobriety, that's just something that's getting in the way. But it's not just about that. We have to see that there's also a very important why. The what opens the door so that we can discover the why. We have to go deeper than simple behavior modification. We have to discover what's underneath. So think about this whole process of the what and the why as a seesaw, right? If all of our focus is on getting sober, then what happens? Well, eventually we get recovery fatigue, burnout. We're not experiencing any kind of balance in our lives, and there's going to be inconsistency. And if all of our life is about recovery, then we're living pass fail. And when we fail, we're going to experience despair. So on the other hand, if all of our focus is on doing the deep digging work without prioritizing sobriety, we find that often this work uncovers and unlocks a lot of sadness and pain, because the reasons we've been acting out include wounds, trauma, family of origin, junk that we've maybe never even identified. And gosh, as soon as we start doing the why work, we realize all the reasons we were acting out in the first place. And so if we have not fortified ourselves in going into this deeper work of why by establishing and maintaining sobriety, we're going to potentially be at a much higher risk of acting out, which is going to take us back to shame and lead us to despair. So if we're out of balance, again, we're going to feel despair either way. So what we're looking for is a healthy balance approach to looking at sobriety's role. So back to sobriety. Do we want it? Yes, I think that's the obvious answer. I doubt if there would be anybody on this webinar today who would say that they don't think that it has any value. But why do we want it? I can think of at least two reasons. Sobriety makes life better now. It just does. My life was better instantly when I stopped acting out. And it's a good thing too, because there was carnage all around me that I still had to sort through and heal from and recover from. But it made my life better immediately because that one destructive element was not happening anymore. But a second thing is it enables me to continue to move consistently and more deeply towards understanding, towards recovery, towards healing, towards life. I mean, that is the bigger goal. The goal of life is not just to avoid something, but in avoiding those things, what do we find? What do we get to experience? So I want to talk a little bit about the work that sobriety helps us to be prepared to do. So we got the little key up there in the corner to remind us that sobriety is important. And so as we get into this, you may think about your own work, a sponsee's work, a client's work that you get to support. But when we talk about the why beneath the what, now we're starting to get specific. So some of the whys that are important to uncover, some of the things we get to understand better once we have been pursuing sobriety and are moving deeper include learning more about my backstory, which I'll find out led to some of the beliefs I developed about life, about myself, about God, about my situations. which contributed to the strategies that I came to incorporate in my life. And then that got me into my stuckness, this addictive life cycle that I was just living in, and the effect that it's had on me. So we're going to kind of take these one at a time. Getting back to our backstory. What do I mean by backstory? Well, I'm talking about when you hear a therapist talk about, tell me about your family of origin, things that happened to me early in life, really from going all the way back, the home environment that I grew up in. And for some people, this included some really hard things like abuse of various kinds, abandonment. Some people just felt abandoned. Some people were literally abandoned. I've been listening to the Return to Heart podcast, and there's a heart-wrenching story that you can listen to in a couple of episodes on about abandonment there, about rejection. And really one of the most sinister things that happens in a lot of people's backstory is neglect. That is just such a booger, because the first three are things that happen that shouldn't have. Neglect is what so many of us experience, where the good thing that should have happened just wasn't there. And a lot of times we don't even know what we were missing because the way that we had it was just normal. But whatever it was, the things happened to me, and I could not healthily process most of these things when they happened. And that aspect right there, not being able to healthily process the event in the moment, is really what takes things to a place of being trauma. There are lots of potentially traumatizing events, but how they are or are not processed, how the people in our lives do or don't respond to them in healthy ways, really helps determine whether or not those things become long-lasting traumas. And for many of us, we had those traumatic events that turned into lingering trauma in our lives. So if that's a part of our backstory, of course, that's going to affect the things that we believe. And here's the sad part. I mean, there's a lot of sad in this. One of the tragic things is so many of these things, the genesis of them is when we're little kids. And little kids do not have the ability to process difficult things like adults. And so we know that children, the psychological makeup of a child is that it is egocentric. That's not a criticism. That's just an acknowledgement. The world revolves around me when I'm a little kid. And so if something good happens, look what I did. If something bad happens, oh gosh, that's my fault. And so some of the core beliefs that form out of these traumas are just that. This is my fault. No one's going to take care of me. And that can even get projected onto God, because how do we construct our image of who God is and what he's like? From our caregivers. And those are the ones that often are the sources of our trauma. So I'm on my own is a core belief that can form, and I have to meet my own needs. Does that sound familiar? I bet it does. And so when we've been living that way, of course, that leads me to develop strategies. Now, just the use of the word strategy, I want to dig in there for just a second, because this sounds very intentional, very planned, very like outlined. But as a child, it was much more about what I was feeling than what I was thinking. Strategies can be adopted without even having the words to call them a strategy. A lot of them are unconscious. So for an example, if there is a toddler who really doesn't have a lot of language to express how he or she's feeling, and yet there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of intense energy in the home, they may really go to a place of sucking their thumb for self-soothing. That's a strategy. When I feel something in my body, when I feel something in my nervous system, I don't even know that's what's happening. I just know I feel something that doesn't feel good, and I want to feel better. And so our strategies often are the things that I learned to do to feel better. In other words, doing this gives me something that's nice, that's nicer than what's going on right now. But let me see here. Okay, yeah, I just didn't want to get off of my notes here. So the sucking your thumb example of a toddler, that's a strategy that when that same child gets a little bit older, gets into puberty, adolescence, that strategy becomes masturbating to relieve stress and anxiety. Guess what? Same strategy, different behavior, escalating behaviors, but accomplishing the same thing, what I learned to do in order to feel better. But these strategies are not just to help me feel better. Sometimes I get to where I don't think that's possible any longer because the situation hasn't changed. And so now I'll just take something that's going to help me learn how to feel nothing. And somebody in the comments made that the statement about numbing. And that's definitely some of the strategies that we develop. A good friend of mine, a therapist named James Horn, he says we find things that when we become aware of the lacking or the need in our lives, something that's going to fill it or something that's going to help me not feel it. And so either something that's going to help me feel better or feel nothing. And I hope that makes sense. So often the strategy will start out as something to help me feel better, but it will escalate into something that just becomes a numbing. And it often leads to addiction, which is our stuckness. So then when we're talking about our stuckness, as we have found ourselves stuck in these compulsive, addictive, unwanted behaviors, well, now from a place of sobriety, we can look back on that and see how my strategy has impacted me. Now, I've got an asterisk on the word strategy because the specific strategy that I'm talking about and that encompasses the line of work that I'm in is compulsive sexual behavior. But I want you to think, if you've got clients or if your experience yourself is something, an unhealthy survival strategy that went in a different way. It could be chemical, it could be alcohol or drugs, it could be an unhealthy relationship with food or gambling or shopping. The strategy scenario applies to everything. So, but looking at the stuckness in the filter of a strategy of sexual brokenness, it's affected me emotionally because it causes me to want to isolate. Again, that's not unique to sexual brokenness. And when I isolate, then I'm going to just keep myself in this swimming pool of shame, and I'm going to develop depression. I'm going to develop deeper anxiety. It affects me spiritually. Again, shame and self-condemnation. Sexual brokenness can even manifest physiologically, as can other addictions. My brain chemistry is altered. It can affect my sexual arousal. There's so many different ways that I am affected in this stuckness. And when we are able to look at how things have been when we're not in a place of it being like that right now, my goodness, it's easier to see what the effect has been. But if we're still kind of in that addictive fog because we're still acting out, we're not going to be able to have the clarity that I've been talking about right now. And I hope that makes sense. Again, if any things that we're talking about are bringing up questions for you, you can ask them in real time, but just giving you a heads up, we are going to have some time at the end for questions. So let's pause for a second and realize that by surrendering to a path of recovery, as we pursue sobriety and as we get to many of the roots of how it is that we got here, now we have the opportunity. We can start to see much more clearly our path forward. And we can ask ourselves questions like, why has it been? And why is it continually worth it to pursue sobriety? And then the deeper understanding that it gives me. Well, some answers to that question. Pursuing sobriety on an ongoing basis helps me break the unhealthy cycles in my own life. And guess what, folks? There are more unhealthy cycles than just looking at pornography, or there are more unhealthy cycles than just hiding bottles of alcohol around the house and running to them when something's going wrong. There are unhealthy cycles that are much more subtle than that. There are unhealthy relational cycles that if I'm not sober from kind of my primary way of acting out, I'm often not even going to be able to see those. So if I'm pursuing sobriety, I can see them. Not only can it break those cycles in my own life or be a part of the breaking of those cycles, it can help me experience the breaking of cycles in my family and my future. How many of us who struggle with an unwanted, compulsive, or addictive struggle can say, if I look up the line in the upstream in my family, great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, like this is something that just got passed down. We hear about generational sin, generational brokenness, but we also have heard, I know Phil in another one of those talks at Fellowship where Jay Stringer was there, that was the first time I'd ever heard of Carlfred Broderick's phrase of a transitional character, which is someone who says, it ends with me. I'm going to break that streak in my life. I'm not going to continue to pass this toxicity down to the next generation. I saw a really encouraging and thought-provoking post on Samson Society's social media one time that says, pain moves through families until someone is willing to feel it. I think about trauma and pain as this generational hot potato, and it gets tossed to us. It's like, ooh, 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 this is hot. I don't want it. And we just toss it right down to the next generation. But sobriety is going to help me to see this is not something I want to pass on to my kids. And so I get healthy, and that allows me to lead my family into my future more healthily. And boy, wouldn't that be amazing? And it helps me live the abundant life that Jesus says he came to give me. If I'm a Christ follower, if I've put my trust in Jesus, then that is something that I am supposed to have access to. Again, Jesus didn't say, I have come that they may have sobriety, and then that's it. Sobriety helps us to have what he really came to give us, which is abundance. And boy, talk about a trap of being someone who has received eternal life, because at some point in your life, you placed your trust in Jesus, but you're not experiencing abundant life. Golly, what misery to have a new identity, but to have so much of my experience be still tied and anchored to the old identity. That's miserable. And that's one of the reasons why addiction is so miserable. So whose help do I need? If I'm saying, okay, I'm on this path, I want to stay on this path, I'm committed to pursuing and experiencing a life of sobriety, not just for its own sake, but so that I can live the life that I was made for. Who do I need helping me? Well, we need helping professionals. That's a phrase that I use to describe clinical therapists, counselors, coaches, anybody who basically feels like they have skills and a calling to come alongside people who need that help. We also need the help of community. We need meetings. We need support groups, because we are not intended to be on this path alone. Now, one just quick aside, sexual addiction specifically is understood to be an intimacy disorder. And a lot of people misunderstand what intimacy is. And very early on, we have learned that if we can do something sexual, that's going to make me feel very close and connected. The problem is I can have sex with a total stranger with whom I have no actual intimacy, because I'm not known. I don't know them. It's just physical, but it's something that feels very close, and it's confusing. And so if sexual addiction is an intimacy disorder, how in the world am I going to get any healing from that if I remain in isolation? So I have to have community. I have to have places where people get me and I get them. And then finally, we need accountability. Put a big asterisk next to that, because I say the word accountability and some of y'all's eyes are going to start twitching, because a whole bunch of us have had some really bad experiences with what was called accountability, because it was just moralism, behavioralism, legalism, basically the behavioral equivalent of a cuss jar. You know, if I admitted something vulnerable, then I got criticized or shamed or punished. That's not what I'm talking about. Accountability, really, to quote something that Michael John Cusick said in Surfing for God, maybe a better word for accountability would be accessibility. We're giving someone access to what's going on in my life and what's going on in my heart. But this could be a sponsor, a trusted spiritual leader, but these are some of the types of people that we need. Now, there's a fourth category that we could put up there, and that would be our families. But those experiences are going to differ from person to person, because what our family situation looks like is going to be different. Not everyone is married. Not everyone has siblings. Not everyone has good relationships with their parents or still have their parents. And so it would be great if our family is a supportive fourth category of people that can help, but not everybody has that. And that's sad. And that's something that we can grieve and mourn. And I don't want to sound cold when I say this, but a supportive family system, while it is wonderful and a blessing if we have it, we can still recover even if we don't have it, if we seek out these other three. And I hope that makes sense. So first, let's talk about helping professionals. These are elements of, there are elements of my story that I just simply don't have the capacity to identify, understand, or process on my own. I may look at some of the events of my life or the things that I did and say, this is why I did them. And that may not be 100% wrong, but there could be so much more to it. I can remember one time that also, we can just miss things. I remember one time that I was talking to someone who was uh, in his 40s. He was married for 20 plus years. His most shame-filled method of acting out was that he would hook up with other men sexually in secret. And he just beating himself up, shaming the crap out of himself. And he's like, I just don't understand. And I was just kind of asking him to share some of, what life had been like for him when he was younger growing up. And he said, well, I mean, I went to a real strict church and my parents were strict. My dad never really spent any time with me. My mom was real overbearing. I had an uncle who molested me for about 5 years. And then I went to college and I didn't really fit in. And I said, whoa, well, hang on a second, back up. And he had just glossed over this person, this same-sex relative who had molested, sexually abused him for 5 years. And I said, tell me about that. He goes, what does that have to do with anything? There can be part of the strategy can be putting these walls of self-protection and just not allowing me to go to some place because it's just too painful. And that's why we need helping professionals who are not going to bull in a china shop us over things like that. They're going to be able to sense if and when we're ready to go to a place that's that painful. But sometimes we have blind spots and we just need to be willing to admit in humility that I don't have the full picture of everything that's been going on. And by the way, helping professionals are going to be able to see things and intuit things and discern things because of their training and because of how God's made them that even really good friends and peers in recovery can't. But that doesn't mean we don't need them. We need community. That's the second element. We need the type of community that we can find in places, including recovery meetings or support groups, because I need people who really get it. They understand what I'm going through because they are going through it or have gone through it too. And they keep me from going through this alone. And I tell you something, one of my favorite shows is Ted Lasso. One of my favorite episodes is the season 1 finale when they lose the game and they get relegated and they're in the locker room. And Ted said, look, this is a sad thing. And there's no other way to put it, but there is something that's worse than being sad. And that is being alone and being sad. And that's true. That's spot on. A lot of the things that we're going through are extraordinarily difficult. We don't need to be going through them alone. So we need community. And the third thing that we need is accountability. Within that community, we need to find a few people, whether that is a sponsor, a trusted spiritual leader, and pause. When I say trusted spiritual leader, I'm not trying to suggest that we ought to be skeptical or untrusting of every pastor. That is not what I'm saying. I am acknowledging that there are spiritual leaders who have not availed themselves of the knowledge, the understanding, the information about addiction to really know how to engage with somebody very deeply on it. And I know many people who have been harmed by well-meaning spiritual leaders just because they didn't know what they didn't know. And so that's why I say a trusted spiritual leader. And I hope that most of us can think of someone who fits that category. But I need people who have earned the right to speak directly into my BS, whether that BS means blind spots or the other one, right? These are trusted people that are going to keep me honest as I grow. And that's really going to be pretty tender because there have been people who tried to volunteer for those roles without my permission, without my consent, without my invitation. And so because a lot of us have wounds surrounding accountability, I would just say choose wisely. Get yourself into a safe recovery community where you feel like you can share the deepest, darkest things and people are going to love you and they're going to say thanks for sharing and they're not going to run away and they're not going to fix you and they're not going to tell you what's wrong with you. And as you bathe in what it's like to have that kind of grace and unconditional acceptance, also know that you need people who are going to say, hey, I think that you are kind of acting out of some of your defects of character right now. And this is what I'm noticing. And you know that they're saying it because they love you. And so that accountability is something that grows out of community. And I hope that makes sense. So again, sobriety is not what gets me where I need to go. Sobriety is the key that unlocks the door and allows me to choose where I want to go, kind of getting back to where we started. And I hope that we can see what I believe to be the proper relationship between sobriety and the rest of the work that we do. And by the way, that's going to be ongoing work, right? That's going to be work that continues as long as we are breathing air on this planet. That's not bad news, by the way. When people ask me how long is recovery going to take, my two answers are usually A, longer than you want it to, and B, the rest of your life. And people just kind of have slumped shoulders. And I'm like, no. Like in Philippians, Paul says that the God who began a good work in you is going to be faithful to complete it until the day of Christ Jesus. So working on this stuff, surrendering this stuff as long as we're alive, that's life. That's not just recovery. And so that's the way that growth and change happen. I want to put a well-known quote up on the screen here from Viktor Frankl. And many of you have heard of Viktor Frankl. He was a neurologist, psychologist, philosopher, and Holocaust survivor. And in this quote, he says, between stimulus and response, and stimulus, we might call that a trigger. Between a trigger and a response, which is what I do about it, or in response to it, there is a space. And by gosh, how many of us have felt like there was no space, right? The trigger happens and all of a sudden I'm doing something. But Victor is saying there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. This is a really good way of describing what happens in the process of recovery. As I have become sober, that space is seemingly getting larger. When something happens and it doesn't send me into an instant spiral, sobriety has helped me to build resilience and capacity to think, okay, what's going on? What does this mean? What doesn't this mean? What do I want to do about it? And so now I'm responding rather than reacting, and I can live the kind of life that I want to live that represents growth and freedom. And it's beautiful. I want to show another well-known quote, probably a little bit more well-known than Victor's because it comes from the Bible. And I've quoted it twice already. Jesus said, I have come. Before this, he says, the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I came that you may have life and have it abundantly. And then the invitation is this as we wrap up. From Deuteronomy, I've set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life. I just want to punctuate this as we're getting close to the end. How many people, and if you are on this call right now and you have experience with your own addictive struggles, how many times has it not felt like you had a choice? I mean, that's really a huge component of addiction. I can remember times when I hadn't even acted out yet, but it's like in my body, this has already happened, right? And it didn't feel like there was a choice. But when we ask for help, when we receive help, when we begin to establish and experience sobriety, we realize we do have a choice and we can choose to accept this abundant life that the Lord is offering us. So that's a little bit of a take on the why beneath the what, so we can get a good picture of sobriety and the role that it plays in an overall piece of recovery. Just a second, we're going to have some time for questions, but I wanted to just tell you a little bit about Awaken real quickly and some of the things that we offer. We're a Birmingham-based, 12-step, gospel-based recovery ministry. But just because we're Birmingham-based doesn't mean that if you don't live in Birmingham, we have nothing for you. We offer online meetings every week, and they're free for men with sexual struggles, for women with sexual struggles, and for women who are going through sexual betrayal trauma. And so if you want more information on how you or a client could be a part of those meetings, just go to awakenrecovery.com/meetings. There's a form on that page that you can fill out, and one of our facilitators or staff will respond to you very quickly. We almost always are able to respond within 24 hours. Another thing that we offer is something called the Roots Retreat. We have a Roots Retreat Men's Recovery Intensive, which is a 4-day intensive that is staffed by therapists and volunteers and Awaken staff. And it's for men who are ready to dive deeper into understanding their addiction and their trauma and then how to healthily pursue recovery. But also we have a Roots Retreat Women's Workshop, which is a 2-day workshop that Stacy and I lead. And we just had one this past weekend. It was wonderful for women who want to heal from sexual betrayal, but also they want to understand better their partner's sexual addiction struggles. we don't go as deep into the traumatic stuff or into therapeutic exercises. We really just stay higher level, and we give these ladies a lot that they can take back to their therapists, counselors, and continue to unpack. You can find out more about the Roots Retreats at awakenrecovery.com/intensives. And then we have a podcast that we started about a year and a half ago called What We Really Want, because like Johann Hari said in his famous TED Talk, everything you know about addiction is wrong. He said the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. And so again, finding the proper place for sobriety as a means to help us experience what we really want, which we believe is connection. So this is a show that is a series of conversations with people, and hopefully the listeners are flies on the wall. Anybody who needs help envisioning and pursuing healthy connections in life with God, self, and others. Unless you think that these are not conversations you want to listen to, y'all, we've got some heavy hitters on this show. I mean, like this one right here. Episode 4, you had the one, the only Phil Herndon on. And Phil, that is still our episode. We uploaded number 48 this morning with Barb Steffens, but your episode is still the most downloaded episode that we've ever done. So make sure that you check that out. And yeah, those are a few things. If you what we really want.show is our website for the podcast, but awakenrecovery.com is our general website. We'd love for you to check it out. So, all right. So we can take some questions now. I will stop sharing my screen if I can hover there we go. Okay.
Greg.
So we are back.
Yes, Greg, thank you. That was fantastic. I was just struck your very last slide there around how in active addiction it feels like the abundant life, just one more way that the enemy gets in and uses something, how we're made to counterfeit the real thing. So love that. Love your continued revisiting of that. We do have one question so far.
Great.
It's a good one. It's, what is the difference between a lapse and a relapse?
Well, I'll answer the way that I do. I would usually use the term slip as a synonym for lapse. So slip and relapse, I would say that a slip is a momentary bump on the road or a blip on the radar where I step back into an acting out behavior, but it's been in the midst of, I've been working my recovery. So it's not like, it's like maybe the pressure got to a certain point and I just said, you know what, screw it. And I did it. But then immediately I checked it in. I called my sponsor. I told my loved ones, I brought it into the light. A lot of couples will have like a 24-hour tell policy, just something like that. A slip is something that is an outlier when a person has been generally living a recovery lifestyle. A relapse is a process that may culminate in acting out behavior that usually is extended and deep. But I think that a relapse actually happens long before the acting out behavior. I think a relapse starts when I quit working my recovery, because if I stop working my recovery, where it's going to go is inevitable. It's just a matter of how long it's going to take me to get there. And often I have found that people who relapse, they don't start all over. They kind of jump right back into where their addiction was at the worst spot, and they find their way back there quite quickly. And so if you notice yourself saying the two most dangerous words for a recovering person, which are, I'm good, notice that. Notice that, because we're not. Like we are and we're not. We're good because we have a power greater than ourselves in God who can do what we can't do for ourselves. But as soon as I think, oh, well, the absence of chaos means I guess I don't need to do this anymore. Why do you think the chaos is gone? Why would you get rid of the thing that helped clear out the chaos, that God used to clear out the chaos? So yeah, a slip, like I know what's happening. I know I did it and I brought it into the light and I'm right back on the path. It's like when you're driving and you run off into the gutter, well, you don't, or into the ditch, you don't get back on the road all the way where you started. You get back on the road where you go, where you went off the road. And so that to me is the difference between a slip and a relapse.
Great metaphor. Thank you. Super clear. Great answer. There's someone posted, David posted, it's really a comment just kind of undergirding what you said, Greg, about sobriety as a key to a whole lot of other things. His last sentence was, I'm incredibly grateful there's more to recovery than sobriety. So it was just a
Oh,
great,
me too.
yeah,
Me too.
for real. So thank you for that, David. Ben has a question. How can we structure community meetings so that they don't fall back into the bad parts of accountability that you spoke of?
Well, the way that we do it at Awaken is we have guidelines that people in our meetings have to abide by. And one of the rules in the guideline is the no crosstalk rule, which is we do not respond directly or criticize anything another person shares. We say that if you have feedback that you want to give, you ask that person's permission. And if they give permission, you share your feedback outside the meeting time. Even if they give permission, we don't do that in our meetings because so many people have come in being fixed, being criticized, being told how they're wrong. And also, we don't assume that even if you ask somebody permission and they say, sure, I'm fine with it, they may really not be fine with it. They may just not feel like they have a say. And so, at least in our meetings, that's not going to happen. And what that means is sometimes people say things that are just, oh my gosh, that's so wrong. Like people will say things that are heretical in the meeting. My wife, Stacy, is on this watching, and she facilitates our betrayal trauma meetings a lot of the time. And there's someone in there who one time said, God is the biggest narcissist. And she's like, oh, but that's this woman's experience.
Yeah.
That's her feeling. She is sharing her feeling. And another one of our guidelines is we understand that feelings are not necessarily based in accuracy, but they need to be expressed. And so we say we don't assume that everything that you're saying is what we all believe or even what you believe, but you need a place where you can say it. And so yeah, we want to make sure that our meetings are a place where the fixing doesn't happen, the criticism doesn't happen, and we train our facilitators so that if somebody does start fixing or start cross-talking, we call that out and say, actually, that's crosstalk, and so you need to save that and ask this person after the meeting if they're open to it.
Great. Very safe.
And that's awkward, but it's better to have a little bit of awkwardness in a moment than a whole lot of people saying, well, I'm not going back because that was supposed to be a safe place, and it turns out it wasn't.
Great. Fantastic. Greg, there's another question. How do you recommend we determine a spiritual leader is equipped to support and guide those in recovery?
Yeah. Well, I think that that's probably going back to my trusted spiritual leader comment.
I suspect, yes.
I would say that if you are a member of a church and there's something going on in your life that you think, okay, my church needs to be a part of this, and you make an appointment with one of the pastors, I would go in there listening. Are they using shame-filled language? Are they saying, why did you do that? What's wrong with you? That's a big red flag. And I'm not saying like get up there and start lecturing them like Greg and Phil and Todd said, you're not doing it right. But just take notes. That's data for you. That's going to be data to let you know if this is going to be a person that you're going to be looking for to be the most helpful. I think that if you've got spiritual leaders whose approach to counseling is read the Bible and do what it says, and that's all. Well, I believe in reading the Bible and doing what it says. I was a Christian the entire time I was drowning in addiction. My question was, I want to read the Bible and do what it says. Why can't I seem to do that? And so psychological modalities and the things that I learned in therapy and 12-step recovery helped me to understand what was getting in the way of my ability to do that. And so I think that if our pastors and spiritual leaders can understand that therapy and recovery are not trying to take the place of spiritual leadership, but they're trying to be members of the team that are under the spiritual authority of our leaders. It's kind of like Moses and Jethro. When Moses was trying to do all the work in the wilderness, and his father-in-law came and said, look, dude, this is not good. You're trying to do too much. Let us handle this part. And so if a pastor, if he or she, a spiritual leader, are using language that lets you know that they are therapeutically informed. In other words, they know about Tin Man, they know about Awaken, they know about Samson, they know about other recovery communities, they know about therapy, and they have like some therapists that they recommend. Well, that's already telling you that probably there's some good things happening there, right? I say probably because every person's different. If they don't know about any of those things, then those may be the things that you need to find on your own, and then decide between you and God how much of the specificity of that process you loop your pastor in on. I don't know if I can get too much more detailed than that. I'm just asking you to have kind of your spidey sense up. And we all have it. I mean, our nervous system will tell us when we are with a safe person. And sometimes it'll tell us we're not with a safe person because sometimes they're doing reminds us of past trauma. And we find out later that they really were safe. But I would say don't infallibly trust your gut, but also don't ignore your gut as you're going through that.
That's great. Great guideline.
Yeah, that's great.
It is hard. I had a professor who used to say, man, when you get into this field of endeavor, working with people, it's a whole lot of subjectivity. So learn how to listen well. You said
Yes.
that beautifully, Greg.
Well, the thing I would say too, if there are any spiritual leaders or ministry leaders, pastors that are listening to this or listen to it as a recording later, one of the things that we also offer is something called ministry cohorts, which is a group of ministry leaders who we meet for a half day once a month over about a 9-month period. It's kind of like continuing ed for pastors to learn more about addiction, recovery, trauma. And something that I go over in those cohorts is don't assume that what is presenting in your office is everything that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's what presents on the surface, and then there's what's under the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And so you may have somebody that's coming in hot, and they're seeming to be very, very adversarial or real, like, oh, they got their dukes up. Well, that might be because their amygdala is firing off so much cortisol that they're in fight mode because that is what has helped them survive various things throughout their life. And it's not about you. It's that this situation with you reminds their body of something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not just reacting to you, they're reacting to you and whatever the exposed nerve is that this situation has stomped on. And so if pastors can learn, hey, some things that might come up in these meetings are going to hurt my feelings or feel like attacks. But what if I had a presumption that this is not about me? What if I had a presumption that this is about much, much more than what's going on right now? And I'm just being invited in maybe at the 11th hour of something that's been going on for a long time, and to have curiosity. And also, I would say to leaders, a willingness to pace yourself. Complicated, addictive situations are not going to be resolved in one meeting or 5 meetings. This is, I mean, if it's a wilderness that they have been wandering and getting more lost in for 25 years, they're not going to get out in 25 days. You know, it's going to take a while. And so a willingness to let the process take a while and to realize that by letting it take a while and being patient, you're not condoning sin. You're not excusing sin. You're creating an environment where people are invited to bring their sin out into the open, which is the only place where it can really adequately get dealt with.
Amen.
So good, Greg.
Really solid way of saying that. I hope people who are in responsible places like that are hearing that. That's a great word. Like, man, if there's one guideline to be used, like listen with perspective of how long the tail is people are dragging in to that office or that cup of coffee.
Yes.
That's a super insightful word, Greg. Well, Greg, what would you say? Man, I could not recommend Greg and Stacy and Awaken enough to you for those
Thank you.
resources you mentioned. Just beautiful work. Anything you would say? We've got 4 minutes. I know some of our coaches probably have to go to sessions and that kind of thing, but certainly want to give you the last word of anything you want to leave us with today.
Well, I would just say thank you for being on here. We have a Roots Retreat men's intensive coming up at the beginning of November. So if you have clients that would benefit from something like that, they don't have to wait long. Also, we keep our intensives as affordable as possible. This is a 4-day recovery intensive, and it's under $2,000. And so, you know, and also we have flexibility on letting people pay over time. So, this is not meant to sound prideful. This is a collaborative thing that some trusted therapists and I have been putting together and honing over the last almost 10 years. We've done 30 of these intensives. The one coming up next month is retreat number 31. I believe it's as effective as anything out there, especially if you've got a motivated person. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me, Greg at awakenrecovery.com, if you have questions, just so that you'll have a higher level of confidence. We do have a men's recovery meeting in Nashville. If most of the people on this are in that area, meets on Tuesday evenings. We'd love to get you in touch with those people so that you know when and where that meets. We would love to have a women's in-person meeting for betrayal trauma recovery. And the only thing that's keeping us is knowing who the people are that want to be a part of it. Because therapists can't give their clients' names to us. They can only give our names to clients. And so we would ask that you do that. And if we have enough women who are in betrayal trauma recovery who want to start an in-person meeting, we'd love to do that. In the meantime, we do have a Thursday night meeting for those women that is available anytime. And as well as for men, we've got Wednesday night and Sunday afternoon virtual meetings. So there's a lot of options for people who want to add our community to whatever else you already have going. I mean, I know Nashville is the birthplace of SA, so there's no shortage of meetings, and there's Samson meetings, and there's therapy-led groups, and there's ways to connect with Tin Man. So I know that there's a lot that's going on. There's Celebrate Recovery. We're another option among many good options. And if you want to avail yourself of that, just reach out to us.
And it's resource rich, Greg. That's great. Thank you so much. Enjoyed it today. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was great. The hour flew by, and it's great to get to hang out with you guys.
Enjoyed it. Thanks everybody for coming.